Good afternoon. We welcome you all here to our study meeting. We'll call to order the study meeting of the West Valley City Council. We note that all council members are present, full quorum today. With that, then, we have our minutes of October 6th. Someone would like to make a motion in a second?
I move to approve those minutes, Mayor.
Second.
Properly before us. Hearing no further comments, then we will, without objection, we will consider the minutes approved. Hearing no objections, it is unanimous in the affirmative. With that, then, we have a review of our agendas for tonight. Our regular meeting agenda and special redevelopment agency meetings. My understanding is there have been no changes to the agendas for those. Are there any other further questions or concerns at this point before we get into our meetings later this evening? Hearing none, we'll go on to our next item, which is the proclamation recognizing October again as National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This is one that we do every year. My understanding is it's, although the numbers and things and dates have been updated, it is essentially the same as previous years. Any questions or comments? If not, then the only thing is a volunteer who would like to, well, let's see, will we have someone here next week from them? If so, we need a volunteer to read it.
Let me ask Eric that question, Mayor. Eric, is there anybody from Victims Advocates or other organizations planning on attending and wanting to read that proclamation, or are we fine to assign or request somebody from the council?
I talked to the victim advocates today, sir, and it was her understanding that the mayor or someone on the council was going to read it, and that's what she was intending. Of course, we could do it any way the council wishes, but that was the intention as I understood it.
Very good. Thank you.
Perhaps in conjunction with that, next week, when we do that, we probably ought to put up or display a copy of that on the screen. We do it for other things, and you know, we do that in our study meeting a lot, but since it's a proclamation, rather than just reading it, we'll read it and display it. Okay. Yeah. Eric says, okay. He's got that. Unless there are objections to that. Since we're doing electronic, maybe that'll help others who are looking in on that. Okay. Did we have anyone specifically wanting to do that, or? The general rule, of course, is if nobody volunteers, then I'll do it. Okay. Next, let's see, we have our public hearing scheduled for next week, application Z-6-2020. And included with that, the actions we will take will be ordinance 20-45 and resolution 20-165 filed by D.R. Horton. This is on property at approximately 4600 South to almost 4,700 south, 5,600 west. With that, I see Steve Pastorick has signed on and is ready to make a presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. So this item is a zone change for 11 acres on 5600 West. I'll start this presentation here. So again, you can see the property outlined in red, again, is 11 acres. This next slide just shows some of the neighboring uses. So there are homes to the north. You have commercial uses on the east side of 5600 West, along with some storage units. And then along the south side, you have a railroad to the south. One thing that's a little bit different from this property too is there is quite a bit of slope to the property, that it slopes up as you head to the southwest. This next series of images helps just to put this property in context. So you'll notice in your packet, there's a number of emails we received from residents in the area. And one of the questions was why townhomes would be considered at this location. So I thought it would be helpful to show some of the other major intersections along 5600 West. So the general plan does show the potential for townhomes on the front portion of this parcel. And in this case, they're actually asking for 3 different zones. So they're asking for C2 in the southeast corner of the property, and the concept plan will show that here in a minute. The major part of the property is RM for townhomes, and then the western portion is R110 for some single family lots. But at this intersection here at 27th West, you can see there's commercial along the frontage, and then a combination of townhomes and apartments that are by the commercial on at least 3 corners of the intersection. The next major intersection here, 35th South. So you can see there's commercial, of course, but not long ago, there was a townhome development approved on the southeast corner that wraps around the existing commercial there on the corner. Then on 41, of course, you have the high school here and commercial uses. Really not any townhomes or apartments except for some duplexes that are north of the Smiths and Lowe's. So this one's a little bit more of the exception. At 5400 South, you have the Maverick and the McDonald's there right on the northwest corner that's wrapped by townhomes. And then finally, 6200 South with the Walmart. There's actually a townhome project approved west of the Walmart that just hasn't started construction yet. So again, just in terms of context, at other major locations, there are generally townhomes and in at least one case apartments. So here's the concept plan. So as I mentioned, there's commercial proposed in the southeast corner of the property. So the C2 portion is 1.1 acres. Then you can see the main portion of the property is for townhomes, that's 8.2 acres. And then the area in the northwest where you can see 4 lots are for single family homes. So if you recall in the aerial image, there is a stub street coming in from the neighborhood to the north. So this would basically meet our code in that whenever you have a stub street, it needs to either be extended through the property or be terminated in a cul-de-sac. So they opted to terminate it in a cul-de-sac. There is, of course, the option to extend the road through the property out to 5600 West, but in working with the applicant as staff, we thought it's probably best not to make that connection, as that would potentially allow traffic to cut through the neighborhood to the north from this development. This proposal, there are 98 townhomes, and they're all 2-story units, all have 2-car garages. Under this concept, all of the units also have a driveway that's deep enough to park in, so you'd be able to have a couple of vehicles in the driveway as well as the garage. There would be a masonry wall along 5600 West, similar to other developments up and down the street. So this segment of 5600 West, you largely have residential behind walls along this section. Then the next few images, this slide shows the proposed elevations of the townhomes. So these would be 3-bedroom units. They do meet the minimum area, which is 1,400 square feet for a 3-bedroom. You can see they're all alley loaded, meaning the garages are on the back of the building. These are just the floor plans, and again, you can see 2-story, meeting the 1,400 square feet. This is just a rendering of the townhomes. And then just some images to help put this in context. So I mentioned that there's the stub street from the neighborhood to the north. So this is looking to the south from that stub street. And so under the concept proposed here, this road would be terminated in a cul-de-sac, and you'd have 4 new homes at the end of the cul-de-sac. This is now looking north along 5600 West. So you can see the commercial there on the east side of the road. And then just, again, this parcel currently vacant with the homes to the north. Now looking to the northwest, and if you look to the left side of the image, you can see the Mountain View corridor being constructed in the distance there, the mound out there. You can see there's existing fencing there along the north side as well. This is looking straight west, where again you can see Mountain View corridor in the distance there. To the southwest, at the south end of this property, so this isn't actually on the property, but there is a Questar, or not, but Dominion Energy property that's fenced off there on the south end of this property. And then, so this particular parcel in question abuts the Dominion property. So this is looking again to the southwest. And then this is looking along the railroad track, which is along the south and west edge of the property. So the last thing I would point out here is you'll notice in your packet, there are actually 2 options for the development agreement. The first option is what the Planning Commission recommended, and that is that there be a masonry wall installed not only along 5600 West, but also along the railroad tracks. That's not actually required by code, but the commission recommended that as part of this project. Option 2 is what the developer was hoping for, and that's the just a chain link fence, which is the minimum requirement in the ordinance. So that's the only difference between those 2 options. Everything else is identical. So it's just what kind of fencing would be proposed along the railroad tracks. Finally, there are also in your packets a number of emails that we condensed into a few files. So you'll notice the largest one would be from the residents in the area. So there were a number of emails we received from residents that live to the north of this property. And one of the issues that I didn't point out in the concept plan is that they were concerned about the proximity of the townhomes to some of the homes that are just right there on the north. So the Planning Commission did require in the development agreement that the townhomes be set back at least 20 feet from that north boundary line. So there'd be a little bit more separation between the townhomes and any existing homes. So that provision is in both options of the agreement. But you can see through those emails, there's a number of just concerns or issues raised by neighbors, and then also some emails from the family that owns the property. Any questions I can answer?
Council?
So
If I may,
go ahead.
go ahead, Karen.
For me, one of my first concerns is the subdivisions to the west have complained about the noise from the railroad track, from the train system. I do not see putting this many people in a situation that's going to be disturbed at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. until we have the funds and the ability to put in those crossing arms and be able to not have to have the trains blow their horn as they go through the subdivision. I think this is too early to develop this land, especially with that many homes. I just don't think it makes sense.
Sounds like Councilwoman Lang's done. So was it Councilman Bueller next?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Steve, as far as the development agreement goes, are they asking for any concessions, or are they just willing to build everything to code if we adopt the ordinance?
That's right. Yeah, they're not asking for any exceptions in this situation. So there are some items that in the development agreement that go above the code, but they're not asking for any exceptions to the code.
I have a question probably for Wayne. Based upon Karen's comment, which is certainly true, that we have had complaints there. You know, when we have somebody build a subdivision and we get impact fees, then we can use that for a park. And certainly this property being developed will bring some money into our coffers. Is there a way to designate that money or use that money to go ahead with the improvements for the tracks and the crossing arms and things like that?
So 3 parts to the answer to that, Mr. Bueller. The first one is yes, certainly we can designate money. I would have to go back though and just make sure that that type of infrastructure improvement is allowable in the impact fees, which I'm not sure if it is. The third part really is that would be so expensive. Last time I remember getting an estimate on this, I think it was $500,000 or more for that one crossing. It probably wouldn't generate enough impact fees to do it anyway, but so those would be the considerations that we'd be looking at.
I mean, I think that this crossing problem was really tied locally to the area right there. And I wonder how far off we'd be, or, you know, if there's a way, this land's got to be developed probably sometime, if this isn't the right time or the right way, or if we can bring improvement along with it. I don't know if everybody else would be interested in that, but it's certainly, and maybe we don't hold off on this project for that, but maybe we could get some sort of plan in place as to how we're going to make this happen as far as the railroad crossing goes, which has been in the back of our minds for a couple of years now.
Right, and the fact that we haven't moved forward with it kind of puts me at an uneasy position, putting homes here where it's not likely that we're ever going to do anything. I would much rather have commercial development go in here, something that's not going to be impacted as much, and hold it off. I don't think townhomes are like the only thing that could go in there, and I'd rather see commercial, something that's not going to be affected by that rail crossing as much, or even like manufacturing. But adding another 100 homes doesn't make sense to me.
I think Karen, she made a point there, because it is true. If people cannot sleep at night, if some, you know, the train go by like that, and it causes a problem. It also causes a problem for the developer. They cannot sell the properties, you know, apartment complexes, condos there, and we're gonna have a big problem for the homeless people. Can go there and do something that's not very good for people surrounding that area. So it's a less impact by having a commercial or industrial area. I think that's would be better. I think that Steve made a good point.
I have another question, Steve. This property is all zoned agricultural, is that right?
Yes, sir.
But they're not required to apply for the RE zone?
Right. So in this case, the property is eligible to request the RM zone because of the access and frontage onto 5600 West. So, and then the portion they're asking for R110 is less than 2 acres. So and it's just that area where the cul-de-sac would be extended.
Right. But they could also apply for a commercial in any of its varieties.
That's right.
Thank you.
Sounds like there's a pause. I have 3 items I'd like Steve Pastrick to respond to. The first one, this is relatively close to the intersection of 5600 West, 4700 South. Even on some of the other major streets you showed us, a good share of those was commercial right on 5600 West.
Right.
So my first question is, why isn't all of this frontage on 5600 West remaining commercial? Because that would be an ideal location for that. It's not right on the intersection, but it's very close to it.
Right.
So why wouldn't we want to keep that all commercial, C2?
Sure. So that was a decision made by the applicant. They were concerned about the ability to fill additional pad spaces right along 5600 West. You know, their point, and actually there were some of the residents made the point also that there's other vacant spaces along 5600 West, and so they were just worried about how much how much could be filled. Ultimately, the applicant in this case is D.R. Horton, who is a residential developer, and the commercial pad as well as the single family portion would actually be retained by the existing owner. So I think that probably played into it as well, that this, as far as D.R. Horton's concerned, the applicant, they were really interested in the townhome portion and not as much the commercial or the single family residential.
Well, I think short term, that's probably true, that the commercial would have some difficulty filling in. We're in the middle of an economic downturn, with COVID-19. But long range for the city, it seems to me that there would be, especially given that they're tearing homes down on 5600 West in some of the other intersections in order to, have commercial there. So it seems like, I don't know, in some cases they're tearing them down to put in townhomes, but I know 5600 West is another main artery of the city that has grown over the years, and we've seen so much of it fill in with commercial space, and we don't have a lot of other places for that to fill in. So I'm just concerned about that. Second item, this project of townhomes looks okay, meets the requirements, as you said. How does this compare, though, with the last several projects we've done by the Maverick Center, by 4100 South Redwood, the one at 56th and 35th, where it seems like they were doing something above and beyond our requirements?
Sure.
But this one seemed to just meet the requirements.
I'd say the main difference is that if you look at, for example, the ones that the council approved on 35th on the used car lot recently, as well as on the intersection of 56th and 35th, would be the units are larger. So, for example, the units at 56th and 35th range from about approximately 1,600 square feet to almost 2,100 square feet. The ones on 35th, those were, if memory serves, somewhere in the 1,700 to 1,900 square foot range. So, and some of the more recent ones have been included 3-story units. So I would say the probably the main difference is the size of the units, and then the fact that some of these newer projects are going to 3-story townhomes.
Thank you. And then the final question is on parking. I noted that on the schematic that they included, they did have some visitor parking. You have the 4 per unit, which in many cases is sufficient. But given the reality of what is happening currently in the market, where you have a 3-bedroom unit, oftentimes there's more than 4 vehicles. And that's assuming, of course, that they don't use the garage for storage. So there's very little visitor parking, which, you know, is always overflow for the residents as well. And it seems like if commercial does go in on the corner, there would be a problem that the overflow would fill in the commercial area. I know it meets the requirements for our current parking standards, but I see things changing, and I'm wondering if the amount of visitor parking is sufficient. What's your feel for that, Steve?
I would say of all the townhome projects we've approved recently, this has actually more parking than the ones that I can recall recently. Most of the projects we've looked at recently have been somewhere in the low to high 3 stalls per unit. So like, 3.2 to 3.9. And that includes, the stalls within the garage, driveway spaces, and then any other, spaces that are like carved out, for example, along the street. And in this case, so you have 4 per unit, plus they are showing some, if memory serves, I think 16 stalls, visitor stalls just off to the side of the street. So at least compared to other recent projects, this one has more parking than other recent projects.
Well, and I can accept that. I know, but I still see this trend of, more vehicles. And I assume there's not parking on the streets. Is that correct?
There's not the one, so there's not like parallel parking on the street, but there are a few places where they've added some pockets of parking where you can actually, pull off the street and park in.
Yeah, I saw the one on the west side, and then there was one, I don't remember right offhand, but it was more towards the east side of the project.
Right.
So I'm assuming if there were 16, probably about 8 in each of those or something.
Right.
It just seems that, our standards are not taking into account the demographic changes that are occurring with more vehicles. And although this is near a location where there are nearby bus stops, I'm assuming that it will follow the same pattern as others with more vehicles there. And even though they're adding extra, it just a concern is
Sure.
all. So that is all my questions. Any others that the council have thought of, would like to ask at this point?
I have one more question, Mayor.
Sure.
Steve, are these streets in this townhome development, are they normal sized streets like a normal neighborhood would have, or are they narrow streets?
So these would be private streets, and so most likely what they'd be looking at is 26 feet of pavement, and so it wouldn't be the same as, so like in the case of a public residential dedicated street, you'd have 29 feet of pavement. You'd have curb gutters, park strip, and sidewalk. And if I, looking at the concept plan, going back to that for a minute. So again, you'd have what they're showing, and this is fairly typical for like a private street, is having sidewalk on one side of the street, which is pretty typical for townhome type developments. But as far as the pavement width is concerned, it's typically for a townhome project 26 feet.
So if their street system, they have to keep that up themselves? And
Yes.
then we cannot, as a city, go in and regulate any of our code enforcement. So if people start parking on the lawn because they just don't want to walk, we have no enforcement there, correct?
So my understanding is that, ultimately the homeowners association can enforce, any kind of parking issues. Where we could, where I see the city getting involved is if it becomes a point where the parking is creating a problem for fire access, for example, then certainly that's something we could enforce for safety reasons to make sure there's sufficient travel space to get a fire truck in and out. But typically for a townhome development, we would rely on the association to enforce any kind of parking infractions unless it's a safety concern.
Yeah, because I just do not see that for the number of units, the number of visitor parking stalls is even close to being reasonable. So I guess I just have problems with no on-street parking, not very much visitor parking. I think it's going to flow out into other parts that we don't want it and become a nightmare in about 20 years when it becomes a fox shadow. Which I don't think we want any more of those.
Sounds like Councilwoman Lang's done. Steve, I do have one other comment. Just looking at the renderings of this project and its overall look, it's kind of ho-hum compared to the other projects we've recently done. It's a little different style. Maybe it's just me that it doesn't look as nice, as attractive, as welcoming as others, or as current. This is kind of old style. I don't know how to, how to refer to that, not being, using the right terms, but it doesn't look the same. But I assume they still meet all the requirements for masonry parts and accents and etc. But it just doesn't look the same.
Right. So some of the more recent projects we've looked at have had a more modern style to them, or they're using flat roofs instead of pitched roofs and rooftop decks and things like that. Actually, this is probably the third or fourth rendition of these. The earlier versions needed some sprucing up, shall we say. So they ended up having to add windows and stone and other features to get them to meet the requirements. Based on what they're showing now, they would meet the requirements. What we generally do for a townhome project like this is at the point at which they come in for building permits, we go through in great detail on their plans to make sure they're meeting every standard. At this stage, we do kind of an overview, and but then once they get into the final construction drawings is when we go through and do a thorough review of all their plans to make sure there's nothing missing in terms of our standards. But so I would say it's definitely different in terms of style, and they did have to make quite a few changes to get to this point.
Interesting. Well, a number of concerns have been raised. How that will impact the final decision of the council, I don't know, but it's been an interesting discussion. Are there any final comments from council members? Hearing none, then we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is communications. And we have an HB 411 update. And Wayne, who's going to handle this for us? Are you going to make any comment?
Mayor. No, I don't need to make any introduction. I believe Mr. Rock's online and should be ready to present.
Yeah, he was just slow getting his picture up, so I didn't see him. John, go ahead.
Yep, sure. Thanks, Council. I just am here to give you an update on the HB 411 process. They finally gotten to the point where we have some expected community costs and the governance structure, and we're starting to approach actually one of the first mandatory deadlines, which is passing a similar version of the ordinance that we passed last December, except this one would actually be binding and put us in the process, and also affirm the governance structure and also start committing us to costs. So just to give an update on the 411 project, obviously, like with everything, COVID-19 has caused some delays in their timeline. So now January 21st would be or January 2021, basically January 1st, December 31st would be that deadline for council action on ordinance language. That's not yet been written or reviewed. Same with the governance structure. That would also be getting approved, but that's not yet been written to be reviewed by the communities in this process. And it would bind us to the first phase of this and require the city to start setting aside budget for expected costs. And then from January to July 2021, negotiations would begin with Rocky Mountain Power, the utility, and the state on agreements, what the application cost would be, independent expert analysis, legal reviews, governance agreements, community expert analysis. And then at some point in there, in the next 10 months, we might also get what the expected rates would be for us as a city and citizens, what they think the rates would go up to start paying for this program. And as the city, we would be paying a proportional share of all these costs that would be getting accrued. And just to get into the economic impact, the current estimate is $700,000 that would be shared by the participating municipalities. This includes the Rocky Mountain application process and noticing costs, or sorry, just actually the Rocky Mountain application process. And then there would be additional $300,000 in community noticing costs, but that's all estimates based on community size and number of Rocky Mountain Power customers. So obviously us as West Valley aren't paying that entire $300,000. We're again paying an estimated amount based on our population and number of customers. Again, this is a high-end estimate, but there's really no certainty if it will go up or down. The way the costs are split up between the communities, 50% of this is based on population and 50% based on electrical load. And the costs could be potentially paid off in phases and not all at once. So there could be a phase one of costs, a phase two, a phase three. This could get split potentially between budget years if needed. But the total anticipated cost for West Valley City, if we're to stay in this process all the way through to finalizing utility agreements, is currently $131,743.61. Almost $100,000 of that is not noticing costs. That's all the Rocky Mountain state utility approval processes. And then there would be about $36,000 in noticing costs. And those are the opt-out notices we'd have to send to all our residents that utilize Rocky Mountain Power, which I'm pretty sure is about every single resident, business, and industry. Us as a city, under this model, we have the second highest anticipated costs. Salt Lake City is the highest with $280,000, but again, that puts us as West Valley as we're paying the second most into this process. And again, the non-noticing cost share of this would go up if other communities dropped out. An example would be if West Jordan, who's roughly paying around the same amount as us, was to drop out of this, our fees would increase on that non-noticing portion. So we'd go from $131,000 to $141,000. And that price tag really just rises up every time another community drops out. So far, I know that Orem has, I think, withdrawn from the process. They were actually the third or fourth biggest community, so these estimates already would have to go up. And I think there's a pretty strong potential for some of the other larger cities or municipalities like West Jordan and Ogden to drop out. That's just based on some conversations I've had and just kind of the general feel from the last couple of meetings. So the governing body that would be part of what would have to get voted on the ordinance in December. Before the program adoption, all votes would have to get decided by a majority of the communities in the program. After we would hypothetically adopt this program, any change would require 2 affirmative votes, a supermajority of communities, and the majority of the electrical load. Anything about procuring resources that would be in the future, if we're going to say we wanted to finance a solar project, a majority of communities and a majority of electrical load would have to vote positive. And it's expected that the first draft of the governance agreement of how all these communities that stay in would actually manage this program is expected by Friday, November 6th. Really, the next steps is that HB 411 committee would want to hear feedback as soon as possible from communities on their intent to stay in the process or leave. That's kind of where I've gotten some inklings of information that other communities are I think their councils are considering opting out at this point. And the staff request is to know the direction council would want to take as the second largest city and potential contributor to this process. It's just kind of being good to our neighbors and letting them know before like the last possible deadline date what our plans would be so they can adjust accordingly. And like I said, in the next point here, yeah, it just wouldn't be recommended to wait until January 2021. It would be better to make a decision sooner so we can let the communities that are going to stay in adjust their economic model to know what their non-noticing costs are going to be. And really in this project now, there used to be a couple different kind of phases of there's going to be the governance pass going on, the negotiations with the utility agreement. This has kind of been collapsed into one overarching project or one overarching phase now. There's really no firm data on the application costs. We know hypothetically it was going to cost the city $130,000 to stay in the entire way, but as more communities drop out, that price tag is only going to go up. And also, we're not going to know the actual rate costs to our residents, what that's going to be until potentially July of next year. And signing the agreement by January of 2021 kind of binds us into this. And it's really, so from a staff perspective, we would recommend withdrawal from the program because there's really just not enough firm data on not just what this is going to cost us as a city for the process, but really what it's going to cost our residents right now in the middle of a economic recession. No one, I think, really wants to have their power rates go up 5-10%. This would be in a program residents would have to opt out from, and there would be some strong potential of residents just missing all those opt-out mailers and not knowing, which also brings up additional potential costs for the city, where I think we'd want to have campaigns to really let them know what this program is and what it entails for them. So again, that's the general overview. I'm open for questions on this, but our staff recommendation would be to withdraw from this process.
Council? Everyone's thinking. I would highlight some concerns that I personally have. One, of course, is this unknown cost for a program that they're still trying to figure out, and Rocky Mountain is still trying to figure that out. And then the fact, I always worry when we cede some of our control or give up some of our control to an entity that can bind us to costs based upon a vote they take after we're in. I mean, it would be difficult to get out once we were in it, but those make me nervous if I don't know exactly what we're getting into. And the other thing I would say, that if this is such a great program and it's going to work, we can watch it work and either join later or get with others who've opted out at this point and band together and have Rocky Mountain Power do a program for us when we know the costs and when we know how it's going to be handled.
Yeah, exactly on that point, Mayor. I have had discussions with other cities who have actually brought up that same point about, hey, why don't we do this with Rocky Mountain Power as communities where we're in the driver's seat? Because I think there's also a kind of a feeling of us as a city, we're not really driving this process. It's getting driven by other parties that have been involved in this for years. And it might be more prudent for some of us, our communities that aren't quite as far along on, having a full sustainability plan, that maybe this is a great place for us to start and work with Rocky Mountain Power as our own communities under our own process, where we can be the ones leading the charge on it, rather than kind of being passengers on the train and hoping it all works out.
Boy, council members are pretty quiet. Well, at this point, let me make a statement this way and to see if that helps us. That is, I would say at this point, in order for us to move forward, we would need a positive indication from the council. In other words, at least 4 members of the council to say, yes, let's go ahead now that we have some costs. I think when we had our discussion before, we said, well, we'll stay in until we see what the costs are. I interpret that we now need to then indicate, yes, let's go forward. If we don't do anything, or if we don't give any indication, my assumption is it will not go forward for West Valley City's participation.
I have something I'd like to bring up. You know,
Yes, Lars.
in December of this last year, we passed a resolution with a goal of achieving zero net energy emissions by producing renewable energy in the amount equivalent to that produced and consumed in the city by 2030. And by opting in or opting out of this House Bill 411 option, that doesn't mean that we still can't reach this goal somehow, and we can have other options, and we should pursue them by, I mean, the council has resolved to pursue this. That I hope that we still have a plan or are developing a plan to work toward that goal.
Lars, thank you. That's an excellent point. I know that John and others on our staff have been doing that, and we've seen some of those projects come through. You know, the one at the Maverick Center, you know, we've seen others that have come through where we're looking to do things to reduce energy costs for the city, very tangible, measurable results. And I like those because it's pretty clear to see what we're accomplishing. So excellent point. And I hope that will continue. You know, with that resolution, I think that's part of what John's been assigned to do, is to continue in that process more and more. And that doesn't preclude him from even working with Rocky Mountain Power directly at some point. Great.
Mayor, just a comment to add as well, if I might. It's Wayne.
Yes.
To Lars's point, very good point, and also to your comment as well. Yes, we are still engaged in both finding more projects to do that would get us closer to that goal, and also finding more scalable and larger scale initiatives and programs that would get us to that goal. I can't honestly say that we are to that point yet, at least in my belief. We had 2 what we thought were possibilities that could get us there, both in terms of the House Bill 411. Doesn't look like that's really going to work out. And also this other idea we had talked about in terms of partnering with other commercial entities along with the city and being able to produce large amounts of solar power. That seems to be at least currently prevented by statutory means, but in basically a practical means. And what I mean by that is, to put it shortly, not really allowed to compete with Rocky Mountain Power. However, just as you said, there are a lot of projects we're working with Rocky Mountain Power on, and we will continue to do so. And even though we are recommending that we go away from House Bill 411, John and I have discussed with other possibilities to get us farther down that road, maybe partner up with other cities or other entities. John, of course, has been having the bulk of those conversations, and there are other cities, other entities that are interested in doing that. So yes, for sure, we will continue to pursue.
And given the timeline where by 2030, you know, that gives us time to research and come up with multiple proposals, and there may be even new technology come forward that will assist with that. Any other comments from the council?
My comment would be, and I've been a little quiet because I've been scrolling through emails here, as usual, I like to get input, obviously, from my neighbors and folks in regards to this. But it's been a while since we've had this conversation, so I'm scrolling back. I don't know. I mean, we didn't have a specific town hall or something like that or a referendum to necessarily gauge interest from the community. But in my informal communications or correspondences that I've happened to bring it up, I don't see a huge outpouring of support or opposition either way. I think most of the folks that I've talked to about it in terms of community response had a similar attitude that we did as a whole collectively, which was, let's see where it goes. It would be nice to have more concrete information. It would be nice to get some more of these details. And I'm not sure that the interest, at least from the folks that I've talked to in the community, has been really great either. So I wish there was just more concrete, I wish a lot of these variables were more sorted out at this point, but it doesn't look like they are.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'll just leave it with reiterating the point that talking with Rocky Mountain Power, pulling out of something like this really doesn't preclude us at all from working with them on something similar in the future that would just work better for our municipality and possibly some other partner municipalities that are roughly in like the same boat or position as us. So it's really not stopping us from reaching our goal. It's just this doesn't look like it's going to be the best avenue for our city specifically. So.
Hearing no further comments, am I correct in interpreting that we will not continue with the HB 411 program and we will find other avenues?
That's what I got out of everything.
Okay. John, Wayne, I think that's pretty clear then. We will not participate any further. Excuse me. We will not join officially. However, if we happen to attend any meetings and gather information about what they're doing, that's fine. But we will not further commit anything to this program. Okay, with that then, there was the COVID-19 update, and then you also saw a summary of the new changes that the governor announced, and we'll see how that impacts our particular city here in the near future. Any questions on that? Hearing none. Council calendar, any questions? Comments? Hearing none. Potential future agenda items. I have one, but does anyone else have any they would like to bring up?
I have one, Mayor.
Okay.
I talked to Corey Holdaway yesterday. He gave me a call. He wanted to know if, he said it's been 2 years since he came and presented on ranked choice voting. And he says that the Salt Lake Council or Salt Lake County is now going to be geared up to do that and would like to know if we have any interest in having him present again and seeing if we want to move forward with that change in the voting. He thinks it would save us money not having to run a primary election. So I don't have strong feelings either way. I'm just bringing it up to the council to see if this is something we want to take a look at again.
I'm interested.
And I'm interested too, but rather than having someone who's advocating specifically for or against it come and present to us, could we have our staff do a little bit of work on it and check some of the cities or places that have done it and come back to us with both the pros and cons of this, the benefits that they derived and the problems that they found, just so we have more of a balanced piece of information about it because I am interested in it. There are things about it that sound good. And so I'd like to do that, but I'd like to get our staff to do a little bit of work first on it. How's that?
I think that's a good approach.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Mhm.
A communication then, Mr. Pyle, to put that on one of our future agendas. It's not urgent, but somewhere in the near future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any others? The one that I would like to bring up, I spoke briefly with Mr. Pyle about this, and I received a phone call from Sunday Hunt. This is the animal shelter and the gas chamber that's used there. We still have that, although I think it's used infrequently, but we would probably need to get a report more specifically from our staff. But Sunday Hunt is with the National, I'm trying to remember now, Society
It's
for
just Humane
Preventive
Society, Mayor, if I
Humane
remember.
Society, that's the one. The National Humane Society. And she has indicated that because we still have that, one of the issues, of course, that we discussed before was the cost of, dismantling it. She has some available grants to provide up to $3,000 if we want to avail ourselves of that to have it removed. Now, I don't need a commitment tonight on that, but I would like to explore it to say, is now the time to remove that and what impact will that have? Personally, I'm supportive. I don't think it's used that much anymore, but it'll give staff a chance to come forward with a proposal. Any comment?
Mayor, if I might, I don't have a problem with receiving more information or communication on the matter. My recollection is that those who do have to put the animals down appreciate having that because it's easier on them and easier on the animals in those extreme cases when it's needed. And that's why we haven't done away with it before. Now, maybe something's changed on that. But again, I'm not working in the shelter dealing with the animals either.
Now, my information is secondhand. That's why I want staff to, Wayne and his staff to gather some information. My understanding is that that has changed somewhat. Now, I don't know what that means if they say, oh yes, we're ready to take it out now or what, but I would like to have them investigate that and come back to us. Because I'm getting that secondhand, not from our animal shelter.
Okay, so the presentation wouldn't be from this person that met with you.
No.
It would be from staff?
Yes. First, we want our staff
Okay.
report. Then second would be, okay, if we feel comfortable, then we'll have this person from the National Humane Society come and make a presentation.
Okay. All right.
But we won't decide that until
again,
after we get our report.
Again, it would kind of be like the ranked choice voting too. If we have the advocate come and present, they'll have a different view than the the contrary.
Yeah, very good way to express it. And I agree. Any others?
One other thing that came up in our Healthy West Valley meeting today, and Jake can follow up with me if he wants, but they had a presentation about or had heard from Midvale, who's adopted a resolution indicating that racism is a public health crisis and identifying it as such. Would we want to get into any type of discussion on that? The pros and cons of whether or not we should identify that.
Oh, thanks for bringing
Jake,
that up.
your thoughts.
My thoughts, honestly, are that since it was initiated in a community organization rather than a formal city or municipal agency, my preference is to wait to hear from them. And if that particular group or
Okay.
committee wants to formulate something or submit something, I would prefer that it go through that normal channel of review that we evaluate any other request for a resolution. So that's
I think
my
that would
preference
be
at this point.
that would be my preference too. So
Great. Yeah.
Ben said if it gives you any trouble, put it on my computer. It works better over there.
okay.
Well, okay. We have excellent microphones. So any council reports? Hearing no council reports, then next on our agenda is a closed session for the purpose of discussing pending or imminent litigation. And so we would need a motion to adjourn
I'm
this
just trying to
regular
get mine to
portion.
work right.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Oh, you're trying to get something to work right, your computer?
Oh, my internet is playing fits on me again. It works on one computer and not on another. So,
Okay. All right. So a motion to adjourn this session where we will discuss in closed session pending or imminent litigation with no further business, and we will immediately adjourn
So-
after that. And once that motion is made, then you will have to sign out. The meeting will end, and you have been given the information to be able to sign in to the closed session, council members and invited staff members only. So
moved.
Second.
properly before us, without objection, excuse me, I need to make sure on this, Nicole. We don't have to take a roll call vote on this one, do we?
No, sir, there
For
just
closed
needs to
session.
be a super majority. So that's all.
Yeah. Okay, then without objection, we will stand adjourned and sign back into a closed session for the purpose of discussing pending or imminent litigation. Are there any objections? Hearing no objections, that passes unanimously. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon.